way. Sorry? It doesn't matter, you can go through either one on a kayak. Propose to one is staying a little bit. I've got a 2-year-old, so we go to Sims Park a lot. Pleasure. Like this doesn't even feel like a job. You know, it's strange, honestly. May has been quiet. This weekend's been busy. For the rest of the day, we've got busy tours. But yes, like spring break was busy. Easter was busy. And then as we go into June and July, I've got a lot of like pre-booked tours here.
So when you came to the States, is this what you thought you'd be doing?
No, I don't really know what I thought I'd be doing. I worked on cruise ships. Before I moved to the States, I worked on cruise ships. And that's where I met my wife, she's from Texas. Back home in England, my career was really in sales and marketing. Manatees, they need temperatures of over 68. So yeah, in the winter months, they will move into the springs. But truly, that kind of winter month is really disappearing. It used to be that manatees would go into the springs November through until March, like beginning of November to end of March. But now it's looking more like really early December through until the end of February, just because the water's staying warmer much longer. We'll just kind of hang out in this area a little bit. Fairly shallow, but I'll talk about the sponge dock a little bit so you guys are aware of it. And maybe I'll fill in some gaps. But yeah, coming this side, usually we see some birds over here in the mangroves and the trees. I can't see anything over there right now, but we'll keep our eyes open. But yeah, going back to manatees, do keep your eyes open. We don't often see them. A couple times a week we'll see them, but they move basically with the tides up and down kind of twice a day, every day. But because they're moving, we don't necessarily know where they are. It's really just a game of luck if we see them or not.
And they move into their food as vegetables, so they don't...
Yeah, they eat seagrass, but they drink fresh water.
Oh.
So traditionally they kind of move up and down the estuaries. Generally speaking, not always the case, but generally speaking, food is that way and water is this way. But they'll swim miles and miles every day. Between food and water, yeah. So yeah, keep your eyes open for like bubbles and wakes and stuff. Anyway, Tarpon Springs. I'll just tell you a little bit about kind of the early side of the history, because I'm sure you guys are aware of the Greeks and kind of how that came to be. But the sponge industry really kind of existed before the Greeks got here. The river, obviously, is Anclote River is the name of the river, and I'll talk about the history of the river too at some point. The first settlement was on the Pasco side. It wasn't Tarpon Springs, it was called Anclote Village. You see that crane there in the distance?
Yeah.
Kind of that way. So on the north side of the river, very small settlement in the early 1800s. The early 1880s. So after the Civil War, Tarpon Springs was like 1886 or something like that. Anclote Village was like 1882 or something like that. But a few years earlier. But anyway, the people of Anclote Village, they were the ones that kind of discovered the sponges kind of washing off on the coastlines. But they didn't have necessarily the industry. Anclote Village was really a tiny settlement with a few families. It kind of grew a little bit and then shrank very, very quickly. There's nothing left of it now, it's completely gone. Basically, it's been replaced with like a block system of houses, so you'd never know there was an old settlement there at all. Other than the fact the old cemetery's there, if you ever go to Anclote River Park down in Florida, you go fairly close to the old cemetery. It's looked after by like volunteers, so you can go in, you can see the original gravestones of the original founders, which is super cool. But yeah, anyway, so at the time, the only harvest of sponges, you guys are aware of what a natural sponge is and stuff? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the only harvest of natural sponges in the States at that time was down in the Florida Keys.
Oh.
So I don't know if you've been to the Keys, super shallow, very flat. So how they were harvesting them down there, very different to how they're harvested now or even 100 years ago. In the Keys, because it's so shallow, they can basically stay in boats. They'd use big long sticks and really kind of saw and hook the sponges from the rocks. Because of that technique, they were called hookers. But yeah, so anyway, those hookers, they moved up here and were very successful hooking sponges in the shallows for like 20 years, all before the Greeks got here. So the Greeks kind of propelled the industry. They really kind of turned it into a global industry. But it existed before the Greeks got here. The 500 Greeks that came in the early 1900s really kind of, basically they brought with them techniques, technology, innovation. Rather than hooking them, they were diving for them with the big dive helmets. A lot of the comes from Tarpon Springs, so you can go, yeah.
80% come from here?
I don't know, Austria, and pick up a sponge, and it's probably come from here.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Super cool.
No idea.
Yeah. It's truly amazing. Obviously it's much more efficient now.
Yeah.
So where they used to be out to sea kind of 3 to 4 months, it's now about 4 weeks, even less sometimes. Obviously with like GPS and stuff, everything becomes easier, boats are faster, all sorts of different things. But yeah, it's much quicker. But it's still the same technique. They still have the dive helmets, they still walk around on the ocean floor cutting them off. The main thing that's kind of important about the sponges is when you are harvesting them, and this is, I hate to say this is a new technique, but it's not, it's like 150 years old or something. But humans have been harvesting sponges for thousands of years, so it is fairly new. But essentially how they're harvested is they leave about 1.5 inches on the rock. So they take most of it, leave the kind of rooted system, so they have to grow on a hard surface. But if they leave that rooted system into the rock, it grows back. Yeah, exactly.
A lot faster.
Which makes it very sustainable. Much more sustainable than the. Actually, the World War II happened, and whenever there's a big war, a big conflict, invention happens and innovation happens. So artificial sponges became a huge part of our world. So the natural sponge industry just kind of didn't disappear. It still exists, but nowhere near as much as it used to. But because of that kind of huge harvest and then drop off, there's actually more sponges out there now than ever before. So it's a huge mating area. It's about 5 miles out to get there, and then about 15-20 miles wide, like east to west, and a good like 80-100 miles north and south. It's a huge, great big, I call it a sponge field. I don't know if that's what it's called, but to me that's what it is.
Is it still down at Key West here or no?
Yeah, there's still sponges down there, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you will do, yeah. There's a lot of that, they'll wash up. If they die, they'll wash up, but also if they're harvested, they talk about the oysters too at some point. But yeah, we'll stay on the left. It gets very, very shallow on the right. Flat, like miserable. Lots of rain. But yeah, in this weather, I always still kind of remind myself, like, this is amazing. I'm kind of used to it now, but I certainly appreciate it. My wife's from Texas, and she constantly wants to move back to England. And she keeps saying, oh, I'm going to like the rain, I'm going to like the cold. And I'm like, yeah, it's fun for like a week.
But not to live there.
No, you just, I don't know. You can never make plans to do anything. You just kind of have to wait to see what the weather does. Billy was just talking about. But it is cool to see kind of a very dramatic change in ecosystem between mangroves and saltwater marsh. I was thinking maybe we should be better off. It's fairly shallow here, so you can kind of anchor yourself a little bit with your paddle to an extent. But yeah, so I never really know where to begin with the saltwater marsh. Like I say, it is dying, and it's critical that it does not die. I'll talk about kind of what it is and why it grows in certain areas, and then I'll talk about why it's killing it, I guess, and then I'll talk about why it's important it doesn't die. Essentially, so saltwater marsh, so it's called black needle rush, this specific grass. Nobody's really heard of black needle rush. It is the most common type of saltwater marsh. You may have heard of sawgrass.
Yeah.
Sawgrass is saltwater marsh. It doesn't look too dissimilar to this as an ecosystem. The grass looks different. Actually taking away the sunlight from the grasses, the nutrients too, the space, but predominantly the sunlight. So although we're kind of harming them, it's really the mangroves that are coming in and causing most of the damage. Obviously without us, they wouldn't be able to be here anyway. It doesn't take anything from the trees. A lot of people think it's like a parasite or something. It's not. It's really not doing any harm to the trees. Occasionally, they will kind of flood a tree, which is super rare. So over here, it looks like that's what's happening, but actually, it's really hard to talk about like sea level change and sea level rise. Ocean levels are increasing. The nature is there. But it's hard to kind of talk about it because there are tides. So you could look back over the last 70 years and be like, well, nothing's changed. But if you're comparing a low tide to a high tide or a high tide to a low tide, then obviously it won't. So it's much easier to say high tides are getting higher, which is absolutely what is happening. So this tree, or both of these trees here, and it will happen to this guy too, the salt water is getting into the roots. So traditionally that wouldn't have happened, but now as it is, so these trees are slowly dying. But I like to just point that out because it looks like ecosystem knowledge is very coastal. So if it's inland, I'm okay with like freshwater stuff and inland stuff. I'm still. I think it's important. I should actually look this probably.
You just have to study it.
You do, yeah. It takes time, and it's fun because a lot of the stuff I know is people asking me questions and I don't know the answer. So I end up having to look it up. So my knowledge is massively expanded since I started doing these tours, which is great. But yeah, going back to the Spanish marsh in like mattresses and stuff, it was the first ever nationwide like true recall of a product. It was Henry Ford put it in the chairs in the car. He must have come down and got a load. Changed it for horsehair, it ended up being horsehair in the end, is what they used. Yeah. I guess it's easier to clean. As you come around this tree, try and stay to the right hand side. There's a great big oyster bed on the left.
So eventually they went to sponges, right?
Yeah. Once you can make artificial sponges cheaply, that kind of replaced everything.
Well, look at the roots on this. That looks pretty neat.
Yeah, that's very
Amazing.
walking.
Is that the walking tree you're telling me about?
Yeah.
Very nice.
They do it less now, but a lot of people will call them the walking tree.
I want to know how to tell the red, the white, and the black.
I will tell you in a minute. We're going to go to an area where you can see all three.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fairly easy to tell the difference once you know what you're looking for. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's very difficult. But once you kind of know what you're looking for, they are very different plants. This is old Florida. This is what Florida used to look like everywhere. certainly everywhere coastal. We're very lucky in this part of Florida. We've had development, but nothing like other parts. Kind of the nature coast, if you like, from here off. Very real and pretty beautiful. Hopefully it stays that way, we'll see.
Yeah, I'd be lost in here. But I guess you can get up and walk around if you had to, right?
Well, you get
Follow the power lines if you go Girl Scout trick.
yes.
Oh, that's something.
The great white eagle. Hopefully it's gonna stop up there. I did, unfortunately. I ended up doing it. But yeah, whenever I get a new guide, so I've got 2 guides currently, so I don't always do tours. Somebody else was meant to do the last 2 days. Got COVID.
Oh no.
She went on a trip, and she's fine. She feels okay. So she did the test, and she got COVID. But yeah, it's really hard. Like a new guide here, it takes a long time to like figure out where, especially with the tides too, because there's a lot of places you can't go on low tide. So it takes a while to kind of suss it all out. Our great white egret's just kind of perched over here in the mangroves. Incredible bird. So the great white egret, it's got a few different names. The great white egret is the most common name, but they're also known as common egrets and great egrets. Super cool birds. They are migratory birds, so in the next kind of, really from now or even a couple weeks ago, for the next kind of maybe 4 weeks, we'll lose a few of them. They will fly north. Less of them are doing that though, so this is really, they're not really seeds, truly. They behave like seeds in the fact that the tree is dropping them and that's how they reproduce, but they've begun to germinate before they leave the tree. So essentially, you could say that red mangroves give birth to live young. These have begun to grow as little mini plants before they leave the tree. So
What's the brown part in the end?
Oh, it's like a little, it's not really, it's part of the growth, but it's not part. I'll pull one out so you guys can see if it lets me. I'll find one that's big, that's ready to drop anyway. If I can get to one, I'm going to use this one here. And they're kind of, it's almost like a bowl, but it's not. Yeah, it's not quite ready. Essentially what will happen is this part shouldn't in theory drop. If it does drop, it's okay, it'll release. But this is really kind of stuck into there. So it's another part of the growth. This, I guess if you like, this would be the seed, and then this is the germinated part of the plant, if you like. Is the best way of really putting it. It's fun, I've pulled off one of these because I'll talk about them too. But yeah, so sometimes they'll drop off completely. Sometimes the seed will just kind of hang out there and the propagule will drop. You can see, where did I put it? This is the stem beginning to grow out of the propagule. And then the roots will begin to grow out of here. They grow year round, but they have a cycle. So they'll drop mostly July, August, September. Most of them, honestly, will drop in September. Some of them will drop earlier. The newer growth, the ones that start to grow earlier will drop earlier, obviously. Essentially, they just get heavy. There's one up here which is super big, so this will drop soon. When they drop, they basically behave like spears. So they'll basically stick straight down. That will stick into the sediment there. We can leave it there, but it won't survive, unfortunately.
Because it has to fall itself?
No, it's fine. I'm just going to grab it out and let it float around, I think. When they drop into the sediment, they really need kind of consistent. This is what will happen. So this is what you'll see most of the time. You'll see them kind of floating. When they drop in that cool period, September, again, it's usually because they're just super heavy. or storms will come through and pull them off, but that's fine because most of them are ready by that point anyway. If they drop into the sediment here, they're not going to be successful. These mangrove islands that we're paddling around, they've really kind of reached their maximum growth. As tides are getting higher, currents, this current and depth of water just won't allow these islands to get any bigger. If the propagules drop and stick straight into the sediment, they may start to grow, but the power of this water will prevent them. It'll probably pull them off eventually, or they just won't get enough sunlight because they'll be flooded too much, or if they're in too much water, they can't breathe. They do need air. They need oxygen. So if they're completely flooded all the time, they won't develop. So yeah, these guys have really kind of reached their. Oh, you can see a little bit of red. You can see what I mean from the red mangroves just here in this one. See a little tiny bit of flicker of red. Ideally, when they drop, they will want to float. They can float for up to a year at a time in the water. Currents just moving them around, but they'll stay alive. Wow. Essentially, the tides will just kind of move them into areas where hopefully they can take hold and grow and be successful, like on the oyster beds that we saw as we went through, which I'll talk about in a little bit too. Or that's how they're finding their way into the saltwater marsh. We don't want them in the saltwater marsh, but that's how they're getting in there. It's propagules floating in there with the tides. Years gone by, those saltwater marshes would really have created a bit of a wall, so nothing would have been able to be successful there. But as they're slowly getting weaker and dying, there's more pockets of space. So those propagules that are floating in there, and that's how they're getting in there. It's not animals moving seeds around or anything. They're basically floating in the water.
So how are they making these legs? They're staying attached and making the legs come down?
Yeah. So they're called frequently known as drop roots. On the way back, we're basically working with the tides. We're pretty slalom our way through the mangroves. But yeah, we're working with the tide and the wind, so the way back will be very, very easy. These are all red. Again, as you can see, these water roots, the prop roots, is the red mangrove. The current won't allow it. I'll talk about that in a minute because oysters can change that. But yeah, as long as there's a good kind of strong water flow, mangroves will never be able to take hold. This channel's been here for at least 500 years. It may change slightly. Mangroves will come down, so the direction of the channel may move by a few foot. But you can you go onto Google and type in Canoe River, Tarpon Springs Spanish map. There is a kind of a drawn map that the Spanish made in the 1500s, and the river looks pretty much identical to how it looks now. A few small changes, but not too many. And they're probably man-made changes too. That's probably us manipulating the river a little bit. Very shallow there, yeah. And then we do have a bit of a wide bend, we've got a bit of a space, but we do kind of turn all the way around and then go through this section. But yeah, so that, as we go over the oysters are the only thing that will kind of change the geography of these areas. The oysters could close this gap, but again, the water moves fairly quickly. You can see how mangroves take hold there, but not in the middle. But that's partly because the water's moving fast. time, mangrove islands are formed with oysters first. Oysters tend to be they provide a really good foundation for those crocules to grow. And then this happens. These mangroves will grow, and in about 10 to 15 years, it will look like this. It looks like there was a tag there once upon a time. It's not the end of the world that the metal sits there, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Oysters, you can see it here, there's another one that's just been left. Looks like a square box of oysters.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a good thing. We do need more oysters. So yeah, just having the crab cages there, that's okay. But yeah, so every crab trap should have a name and address written on it, so you know who this belongs to. But if you don't see that, you can kind of assume that nobody's actually checking off on that trap anymore. Crab's getting out. They're very, very protected. Again, so you could eat these, they are edible. The reason they are so protected is because they are filtering the water for us. One oyster will filter 50 gallons of water a day.
Wow.
So this oyster bed is filtering thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of gallons of water every single day. Unfortunately, over the last 100 years, we've destroyed or removed about 90% of our oysters here in Florida. There is a season to actually harvest them, but even in season you can go to the website and it will tell you where you can get them. You really have to do it. Most of Florida, even in season, is a great big red zone where you can't get them. There are tiny pockets where you can, but those pockets are generally kind of getting smaller too. We are putting them back. So when I mentioned the crab trap there, it's okay. A lot of the time we put oysters back, we actually farm them in similar looking things. They look like crab traps, like metal cages. In safety, a lot of things will eat them. So even though we're not, raccoons will, birds will, fish will, crabs will too. Lots and lots of things will eat them, which is okay. That's natural. But when we put them back, we can't put them back in a small quantity because they will get eaten. We have to put them back in a great big number to make sure that even though they are being eaten, there's enough of them to reproduce to counteract the fact they're being eaten. What we're really looking at here, you can kind of see clumps. In each clump, there's a few that are alive and a few that are dead. New oysters will grow on old oyster shells. So yes, they're not all alive. Some have been eaten, some have died through other things too. But yeah, it's truly amazing. This is one of the potential solutions for the saltwater marsh. These oysters should be in and around those saltwater marsh areas, but they are being installed. Crystal River, further north, is doing a great job at reinstalling oysters because they will help kind of clean the water. If we suddenly went back to 100% oysters overnight, runoff would still be a problem, but nowhere near the problem it is now. The oysters would really be kind of mitigating the problem for us. They massively help the seagrasses too. So seagrass is different to saltwater marsh, but they're being kind of harmed by similar things. Seagrass, it's the same number. We've lost 90% of our seagrasses over the last 100 years. We've lost 90% of our oysters over the last 100 years. They are connected. The seagrasses, which is manatee food, we've lost lots and lots of manatees because we've lost lots and lots of seagrass because we've lost lots and lots of oysters. When we put the oysters back, seagrasses do better. The seagrass, it's not like the saltwater marsh. The seagrass spend all of their time underwater, so they need to be able to photosynthesize. They need clear water to get sunlight. If there's algae blooms or whatever kind of clouding the water, they can't get the sunlight, so they will die. So yeah, oysters basically are the solution to everything here. If we put more oysters back, we'll have more manatees, and we'll have more fish, we'll have more dolphins. Everything just kind of works better if the oysters are back in place. The reason, by the way, we don't have so many anymore is because we did over-harvest them, but also we just simply destroyed areas where they were. So when we built seawalls, causeways, islands, bridges, roads, whatever it may be, we destroyed huge sections of oyster beds. But now, like I said, now they're very, very protected. Very, very important that they're protected.
Is there anybody trying to put more in?
There's loads of organisations. It's not really like a statewide. Hello guys.
Hello.
Hey.
Alright, I can't.
Just be mindful, get shallow there. I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah,
But,
thank you.
But yeah, so oysters are kind of the solution to our problems, ecosystems wise. Much easier to put oysters back than it is to kind of convince farmers to use different fertilizers and things.
How do they put the oysters back? Do they put them on a rock and drop them in there, or how does it?
Yeah, so it's either cages. There's loads of different things. One of the kind of most ingenious solutions. I don't know if you guys have been down towards Miami. There's a key there called Key Biscayne.
Heard of it? Yes.
It's a small little island off the coast, but that community works with restaurants, and essentially the restaurants collect all of their used oyster shells. They donate them, and then homeowners with docks are able to go and pick up the oyster shells. Then they're basically drilling holes through them and hanging them by ropes off their docks. Oysters are attaching themselves to it, like the spores. It's like plankton. Plankton kind of will form oysters. An oyster baby is part of the plankton family, if you see. So they're just kind of floating around. You can't see them, but they're here. They'll attach to those shells, and then what will happen is the community will come together to lay hundreds of these ropes out. So again, you couldn't just put one out because over time they get eaten, but they'll lay hundreds of these ropes out of brand new oysters in a different area. There's loads of different communities and organisations doing it in different ways. There's no one solution, but essentially we need a hard surface. It has to be a hard surface, and it has to be in a great big number too. We'll hang out here just a little bit. I'll talk about the trees, and then we'll cross over this main channel here and start the headband. The trees over here, they're called Australia pines. They are kind of from Australia. They don't call them Australia pines in Australia because one, they're not pine trees. So again, another quite poor name. We call them Australia pines. We brought them over from Australia to do a job for us in the 20s and the 30s, but it was a big problem. They're an invasive non-native species. We brought them over for a very specific reason, and it's kind of ingenious really, just lacked a lot of foresight. When we were dredging, so dredging is basically digging under the water and using that sediment for something, or just digging channels. Florida's shallow. The whole river originally would have been this shallow. The deep sections are because we've come through and dredged to allow boats to move up and down. When we do that, just up here there's a black mangrove that we can get fairly close to. The black mangrove is again, so the main difference is really the leaves. The trunk and certainly the roots are really dark in colour, but other than that, it's a fairly similar colour. The reason I'm super close is, and I'll move out the way so you guys can get close too. The black mangrove, it works with the salt in a different way. So all mangroves are freshwater plants. They just kind of handle or deal with the salt in different ways. The red mangrove filters the salt of the root. About 98% of the salt is filtered out the root. The black mangrove brings in all of the water, including the salt, and then kind of excretes the salt to the leaves. And you can literally see, when I said like a magical tree, it looks like there's glitter on the leaves. Really kind of pure crystallized sea salt. And if you want to, you can lick a leaf. Very, very salty. I'll move out your way so you can at least come and see it. But yeah, they'll just kind of like shine in the sun. But it's a consistent cycle. The rain will wash those leaves off, and then they'll keep kind of excreting. Super, super cool. So it's this one here with the smallest leaves.
Oh, the smallest leaves. I see the white ones. Yeah. Okay.
Try not to lick the leaf that I licked if you want to avoid that.
Oops.
Not that one.
Not that one.
Yeah.
Because it's further to the right.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yes.
Oh, I see the salt crystals.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Very
Yeah,
cool.
super cool. Little magical tree.
Look at that.
Looks like frost, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Salt.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, it looks like frost is great. Glitter. I always say it looks like glitter.
Pretty. There's little flowers.
Yeah, they do flower.
That's pretty.
Not in a big way though. It's very small flowers.
I got caught up in it too.
run into here. A lot of the time they're just like, well, I've fished here for 20 years. So they think it's public land, is what they think. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Pull you in a little bit so you have a bit more land with you. Welcome back, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's a lot of fun.
Not too much exertion, but enough.
Just enough. I'm sorry we couldn't find more wildlife.
Yeah, we still learning.
This wasn't the day. Well, yeah, plant heavy tour today.